We shall now talk about how the modern digital computers evolved or had technological changes from 1940 till date. So that is known as generation of computers. The thing you really need to understand is over a period of time, computers became faster, cheaper, more affordable, efficient, had higher speed, and were more reliable. So this is the basic change that occurred over a period of last 70 to 80 years. So the computers which were produced between the age or the years 1940 to 1956 were known as first generation of computers. Since the circuits in these computers were designed using vacuum tubes, this generation of computers is known as vacuum tube based generation of computers. So for those of you who have no idea about what vacuum tubes is, it's really tough to visualize it because probably the only people who would have seen a vacuum tube have been your parents, would have been using an old huge transistor which was made up of vacuum tubes. So vacuum tubes is an electronic component similar to a transistor except that its power consumption is very high. It generates a lot of heat. Then the main memory or the RAM was based on magnetic drums. Magnetic drums is a metallic cylinder which was coated with magnetic oxide where information or data was recorded. The problem with this first generation of computers was they were very huge, some typically around 200 square feet, 500 square feet, 600 square feet, and so on, and they occupied complete floors. Because of their huge size, they generated a lot of heat, were really slow because technology at that time was not developed, consumed enormous amount of power. As a consequence, they needed very costly equipment for cooling it. They were very expensive and frequently broke down due to excessive heat generation and required frequent maintenance. At that point of time, the computers did not have high level languages for programming them. Machine level language was used for writing code in this first generation machines. The input, instead of the keyboard, at that point of time you had a punched card or a paper tape, and output was through the printouts, not the modern printers, but they had printouts at that particular point of time. Examples of first generation computers were machines called as ENIAC. We'll be taking a look at this fellow. EDVAC, UNIVAC, IBM 701 and IBM 750. So the first example of a first generation computer is ENIAC, which literally stands for Electronic Numerical Integrator and Computer. So if you look at the image, this is the actual original image of the first generation computer, which is the ENIAC. So here you can see it's occupied tremendous amount of space. There's vents here for the air condition and cooling. So you see a lot of wires, a lot of circuits, so generates a lot of heat and power. The credit for inventing ENIAC goes to John Moseley and Presper Eckart, who were working at the University of Pennsylvania at that particular point of time. So they developed this particular machine. In fact, the unique feature of ENIAC is it's considered to be the first general purpose programmable modern electronic computer. Another unique aspect of ENIAC, it was based on using the decimal system, which is no longer used. Today, all machines are based on the binary number systems. Now let's take a look at one more machine of the first generation. Let's call it, or it's called as the EDVAC. So in EDVAC, again, was an improvement done by Presper Eckert and John Moseley. The full form of EDVAC stands for Electronic Discrete Variable Automatic Computer. That's why you see all these characters highlighted. That's the abbreviation for EDVAC. It improved upon ENIAC, used the binary number system, and it had a main memory of 5.5 kilobytes. So you can imagine how lucky we are. Today we have memory worth multiple gigabytes. We have 16 gigabytes or 32 gigabytes. But at that time, even such a huge computer had just 5.5 kilobytes of main memory. And most importantly, it was designed on a concept called as von Neumann's concept of a stored program machine. What it meant is von Neumann proposed the architecture of a modern computer, where he said, in order for a program to be executed, the programs, that is the data and the instructions, should reside in the main memory of the computer, and the CPU shall execute the instructions in sequence one after the other as per the program. So that is known as the von Neumann concept of a stored program concept. So this was based on the von Neumann concept. So we discussed a couple of first generation examples, the ENIAC and the EDVAC. Now let's try to take a look at what happened in the second generation of computers. The second generation of computers were designed, or the circuits in them were designed using transistors, as opposed to vacuum tubes. Between the years 1956 to 63, transistors, which you can see the tiny pictures here, were used to design the circuits. Because transistors emit much less heat than a vacuum tube, are more compact, consume less power, obviously we had multiple advantages. So what happened? The machines became smaller, they were faster, consumed less power, more reliable compared to the first generation, generated less heat, and their applications increased. Now, in this generation also, magnetic core was used as the primary memory. Magnetic core is, as I told you, something like a drum coated with magnetic oxide used to store data. And for secondary storage, a magnetic tape or magnetic disks were used as hard disk, what we are calling as hard disk today. So these things, magnetic tape, will be taken a look as to how they work in the subsequent chapters. Now, the changes that occurred compared to the previous generation were sponge cards were still used for providing input and output was still through printers. But in place of machine language, assembly language started being used more widely. And after that, high level languages like Fortran, COBOL made their entry into computer world. You will understand this word assembly, high level language, when we come to a chapter called as software concepts. I believe it's chapter 4. That time you will have an idea of what is assembly, what is machine, and what is high level language. So at this point of time, assembly was used and Fortran and COBOL just got introduced into them. The computers used techniques called as batch processing and multi-programming. These are again concepts related to operating systems, which we shall be covering in chapter 4, which stands for software related concepts being prescribed in your syllabus. So they used batch processing and multi-programming. Examples of machines of this particular generation were IBM 1620, IBM 7094, and CDC 1604. So this second generation was a serious improvement over the first generation. So as you see, over generation, it will consume lesser power, it will be more affordable, smaller size, more efficient, faster, and there will be changes in using whether to use machine language, assembly language, and so on.